Dear students of class 12 in Rajshahi College, I welcome you to join my class on verb forms, which you are scheduled to read in your class 12 studies, and this is a tense form is an item in the second paper syllabus from which you need to determine the verb forms in different sentences. Actually, though you will be asked in the question paper to determine and use the right forms of verbs, but in the true sense, you need to use the suggested or marked verbs in their right tense forms, and we have three other verb forms which do not belong to any of the tense form groups. These verb forms not included in the tense form groups are called non-finite verbs. In a previous class, while discussing the non-finite verbs, I told you how the non-finite verbs like present participles, past participles, and infinitives are used in the English sentences to determine a secondary function in a clause or in a sentence. Today, I will discuss the methods how you will be able to determine the right form of verbs and right form of tenses of the verbs and the verb forms. To determine the tense forms of the verbs, we need to depend on the adverb of time in the sentences or in the clauses. That is, you have to carefully determine the adverb of time given in the clause from which you need to determine the tense form of a verb and use it properly in that sentence. So, first I give you a catalog so that you can read and keep in your mind which adverbs determine which tense form of a verb. After that, I will show you some examples so that your learning is better from this class. If you do not have any adverb of time, no adverb of time or only, usually, or only, regularly, or sometimes you may get the adverb every plus month, with a month, year, etc. You will present the verb in the simple present or present indefinite. But if you have the use of the adverb last or es star, you will present the verb in the simple past yesterday. Rather, we should use the word yesterday. Simple past or past indefinite. If you get the presence of a next or tomorrow, you will determine that marked verb to be used in the future indefinite tense. Thus, if we do not have any adverb at all in the sentence or clause, or we have the adverbs like usually, regularly, or every year, every month, every day, the verb should be presented in the simple present form or present indefinite form. Similarly, if you have the word last along with the name of a day or month or year or night, for example, last night, etc., last afternoon, etc., the presence of the word last will determine, and similarly the presence of the word yesterday in the clause will determine the verbs being in the simple past or past indefinite form, and the presence of the word adverb like next or tomorrow will determine the verbs being in the future indefinite form. So we have got the criteria of making a verb or determining a verb in the indefinite forms of the tenses. In the indefinite forms of the tenses present, past, and future. And now let us see how the continuous forms of the tenses are made. If you get an adverb like now, at this moment, and even the adverb like presently. For indefinite tense, I told you that the presence of the adverbs like usually or regularly is required. And for the present continuous form, like now or at this moment, presently is also required. The presence of either of the three adverbials I have written on the whiteboard will determine the verbs being in the present continuous form. Similarly, the presence of the adverbial of time like then or at that moment will determine the verbs being in the past continuous form and the presence of then plus tomorrow or next will determine the verbs being in the future continuous form. So, the presence of now or at this moment or presently will determine the target verbs being in the present continuous form. The presence of the adverbials like then or at that moment. Just follow the difference between the use of the present and the past continuous forms of verbs. If you have at this moment, that makes the verbs being in the present continuous form, and if you have at that moment instead of this, it will determine the verbs being the target verbs being in the past continuous form. Similarly, if you have then, but there is the presence of a tomorrow or next, next month, next year, next week, next evening, etc. You will present it in the future continuous form. Thus, we have got the use of or the nature of the use of the continuous forms of the present and present, past and future tenses. And let us proceed how we can determine a verbs being in the perfect form. If we have the presence of the adverb like just or just now, of course, the clause or the sentence should have a finite verb in the present perfect form. You know, present perfect form. And if you have the adverb like just then and sometimes before a simple past, you need to present the target verb in the past perfect form. And if you have after plus next, you will use the verb next or even tomorrow. You will use present the target verb in the future perfect form. Thus, we have learned how the present perfect form, the past perfect form, and the future perfect form is determined in the sentences. Finally, we have the last form, that is called perfect continuous. If you do not have any adverbs like last, next, tomorrow, yesterday, etc., if you have only the words, the phrases like for plus duration, well, for plus specific, period, such as for an hour, or like for 2 days. For plus specific period of the verb's action, or we have since plus hour or date or day or month or year or age. For example, since last Friday, or month, last Friday, last month, 2015, etc. You will use the verb for number 1, for plus specific period of action, and 2 plus our date, day, month or year or age. You will present the verb in the present perfect tense. Similarly, with these structures, if you have the use of, well, if there is a if there is a last, previous, etc., with an adverbial as, shown in 1 and 2. 1 and 2 means for plus a specific period, since plus specific time. You will use the verb in the present perfect continuous form without a last, previous, etc. if we have the phrases like adverbial phrases like for say plus a specific period like an hour or for 2 days, or we have the adverbial phrase like we have an adverbial phrase like since last Friday, since last month, since December, since Mughal era, since the independence of Bangladesh, etc. That is since plus time. We will use the verb in the present perfect continuous form, and if the phrases mentioned in the example 1 and 2, there is a last in the clause or sentence, we will determine the verb being in the past perfect continuous forms. And similarly, if there is the presence of a next and or next or tomorrow along with the presence of for plus specific period or since plus specific time, that will be presented for next and tomorrow future perfect continuous. But in English language we have the littlest presence of or use of future perfect continuous form. So far I have presented on the whiteboard how different tenses tense forms are determined in the active verbs in English sentences. Well, sometimes you may get a few verbs which need to be used in the passive form. You know, transitive verb is a form of finite verb followed by an object. That is, the object determines what or what or what the finite verb does. What the finite verb does. Thus, an object is a noun and only transitive verbs have objects. Transitive verb, you know, a form of finite verbs. The other two forms of finite verbs are intransitive verb and linking verbs. Sometimes in a sentence you may be given a transitive verb to determine its tense form. How you will determine the verb in the transitive form? Because the verb which always needs an object. For example, if you say or write, I read, the sentence is not completed. You have to determine what do you read. I read newspaper, maybe books, or etc. Similarly, she wanted. This is not a complete sentence. What did she want? The answer must be there in the sentence, and this answer, she wanted a book or an umbrella. The nouns like books, newspaper, a book, and umbrella are objects. There are some verbs like read, wanted, and more, such as they made, what did they make? You need to tell what did they make within the sentence or clause to complete the sentence. Otherwise, this will not make a complete sentence. They made a tent, etc. Verbs like these ones, wanted, read, made, always needs an object. But you have such a verb without an object, you will present it in the passive form. For example, if you have a sentence and a verb like this one, they tell a story. Well, they to make the sense easier, I should use a different verb. The chair make of wood. We have two problems in this sentence. The chair make of wood. First, what did the chair make? We do not have the answer. What did the chair make? For example, he made this house. He made this house. In this sentence, what did he make is determined by the object, this house. But in this sentence, what did the chair make is not determined, because we have a prepositional phrase after the verb make. Or put the presence of the prepositional phrase with the noun determines the phrase of woods being in the prepositional phrase form. So, when we do not have the object of the verb make, we will present the verb make in the passive form. So, what will be the right use of the verb, proper use of the verb? The chair is made of wood. Full stop. Let us cite another example of a similar determining of the passive form of verb in another sentence. Last night the boy threaten on the street. See, just see. On the street is not an object because the combination of the prepositional phrase and the noun the street. The combination of the prepositional phrase on and the noun the street has made on the street a prepositional phrase or adverbial of place. Therefore, this is an adverbial and it cannot be the object of the sentence, but the verb threaten always needs to be declared who is or are threatened. For example, in the active form, I threatened him. Him is the object. Since there is no object after the verb threaten, we will present the verb threaten in this sentence in the passive form. Last night the boy was threatened on the street. Well, the previous sentence or the first sentence in the example of the use of the passive verbs, we have presented the finite verb in the present perfect present indefinite form with a passive verb, and in the second sentence we have presented the finite verb in the past indefinite form because of the presence of the adverbial last night. When I was demonstrating you the use of the present indefinite form, I told you that the presence of the adverb last in the sentence or clause will make it a sentence in the simple present or simple past form. Therefore, the presence of the adverb like last night has determined the verbs being in the past indefinite form, and since threaten is always a transitive verb, it needed an object, and as there is no object after the verb threaten in this sentence, we have used or presented the verb threatened in the passive form. So, in the examination paper, you will have to determine not only the active forms of tenses, but also sometimes you need to use the passive form of verbs. And finally, so far I have discussed the determining of the finite verbs in the sentences or the verbs in their tense form in the sentences. But as I told you that use right forms of verbs include both tense forms and the verb forms as well. We will have to determine, we may have to determine the forms of certain verbs in the non-finite form. That is, verb forms means non-finite verbs such as present participle, past participle, and infinitives. These are the verb forms in the sentences which are not which will be used not in either of the 12 verb form 12 tense forms. You have to remember the terms tense forms and verb forms. When tense forms means, it means the when we speak about tense forms, that determines the use of a verb in either of the 12 tense forms. And when we say or utter the word like verb form, we mean the use of a verb in either of the three non-finite verb forms. Thus, let us see how the verb forms are used. While I was introducing you to the finite verbs, I told you that all finite verbs always have a subject. Even in imperative sentences, the subject is implicit, but a finite verb cannot exist without the presence or existence of a subject. Similarly, a non-finite verb is never a verb of a subject. Rather, a non-finite verb is the verb of an object, or sometimes a non-finite verb may be used as the secondary verb in a clause. For example, the man SWK, sick, some food, it. You have to determine the forms of the verbs like sick and it. Since sick has a subject, the man, this verb should be presented in the finite form, and finite form means this verb should be presented in a tense form. So, as there is no adverbial of time in this sentence, we will simply write the man seeks some food, and we understand that the man is seeking some food because he wants to eat. So you will present this verb eat in the infinitive form, to eat. Similarly, as after, take, T, he began his journey. Well, I have already written the finite verb of the subject he, but just look at the verb take. Take do not have. Take do not have any subject. Therefore, take is the secondary verb of the subject he. So you will present it in the present participle form, present part of the verb, and the present participle form of a verb is a non-finite verb. After taking tea, he began his journey. Similarly, sometimes we may have a secondary verb in the passive form. For example, I found the man give some money. Simply you will present it in the past perfect form. I found the man. Well, this does not make a good English. I found the glass loss last night. You will use the past perfect form of the verb loss. I found the glass lost last night. And dear students, in this class I have discussed how to determine the tense forms of the finite verbs. Though I haven't given any example of the use of those the determined finite verbs, I have just shown you what tense of verbs can be used, what form of tenses of verb can be used in the presence of which adverbials in the sentences. And I have also discussed in this class how the passive verbs and non-finite verbs are determined. I like to call a day of this class right now. In the next class, I will present the examples of the determining of active verbs in either of the 12 tense forms, which are popularly known as finite verbs. Or in other words, in the next class, I will discuss the determining of the finite verbs in the sentences with the help of the adverbials presented in the sentence. So, I invite you to join the next class and I hope the attendance of the classes will develop your learning, will help you learn better the use of the forms of verbs. And wishing you all the best, wishing you a good health, a sound health. Keep the precautions to get rid of the corona. May Allah bless us all so that we are not affected by the fatal disease or any other disease or disaster or problem. Wishing you once again best of luck. Thank you for today. Thank you.